So we'll begin today by trying to explore how compassion actually works itself out, trying to explore some of the mechanics of it. As was indicated in the children's teaching, the Buddha gave us the awareness that we should practice both temporary and ultimate compassion, or bodhicitta, that we should do what we can to make sentient beings happy in a temporary way, and then we should also do what we can to make sentient beings happy in an ultimate way. The teaching on ultimate compassion is based on the idea that there is a state beyond suffering. In the first teaching that the Buddha gave, he gave us the Four Noble Truths. He told us that all sentient beings are suffering, that they are suffering from desire, that there is a cessation to suffering, and that is the cessation to desire, that these two are synonymous. I'm paraphrasing it. And then the Buddha laid out the path, which in from the Theravadan point of view is the Eightfold Path, and from the Vajrayana point of view would be the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom being the awareness of emptiness, and knowledge being the awareness of cause and effect relationships. So that the Eightfold Path in the Vajrayana view is made more succinct. So based on that teaching, the Buddha teaches us that we should come forth then and try to create ultimate happiness. Ultimate happiness then is understood as being the cessation of desire, or the state of enlightenment, which would naturally arise when hatred, greed, and desire are purified from the mind stream. So the state of enlightenment then is the ultimate state of happiness. It is a state beyond suffering, and it is considered that enlightenment is the state beyond suffering in that the components of suffering, karma, cause, and effect, are no longer present. They are pacified and purified. The state beyond suffering is understood to be the natural primordial wisdom nature, free of the contrivance of conceptualization, of ideation, of the clinging to ego or self-nature, which is the mother of all desire. The thinking here is that when one believes in self-nature, when one assumes the identity of self-nature, one then begins to distinguish between self and other. And one always has to react toward other with either acceptance or rejection or neutrality. And neutrality, of course, is a mixture of acceptance and rejection, in that one has to run through both in order to arrive at a very passive kind of reaction such as neutrality. So that clinging to self-nature is the mother of all desire. Desire is really not attraction, or desire is considered to be not separate from repulsion, in that they are the same, almost in the same way that one would have two sides of the same coin. If one didn't have the mind of desire, or the mind of attraction, one would not be able to create the idea of rejection or repulsion. They're really the same phenomena. It's ego clinging and desire that is the root of all suffering. All karma, cause and effect relationships, actually arise from that desire. And so the Buddha teaches us there is a state beyond suffering, and that state beyond suffering is where one pacifies all such ego clinging, pacifies all such desire, and the natural primordial wisdom state is allowed to naturally arise and reveal itself. The Buddha never said, "I am wise to all things," when he was asked to describe himself. He said simply, "I am awake." What is that he was awake to? He was awake to his own nature, awakened to his nature free of contrivance, free of attraction, repulsion, free of ego clinging, free of desire, free of any contrivance or distinction, simply awakened to the primordial wisdom nature. So that is the Buddha's teaching on that. How are we to understand compassion? Well, the teaching that I gave the children is appropriate for us as well. We are to understand that we can participate in giving temporary happiness to sentient beings in that we can be kind in an ordinary way, then we are to understand that we can give permanent happiness to sentient beings, and that we can participate in the means by which they can attain enlightenment. We can help them to pacify hatred, greed, and ignorance within their own mind stream. But we must understand that in order to do so, one must apply the technology, one must apply the path. There is a method that one must use. One cannot determine for oneself how to pacify hatred, greed, and ignorance, because we wouldn't know. You see, we haven't done that yet. No sentient being involved in karma, cause, and effect, involved in cyclic existence, knows how to pacify hatred, greed, and ignorance. We might have a clue, we might have an idea, but that idea should be based on the teaching. The teaching can only be given to us by one who has crossed the ocean of cyclic existence, who has attained Buddhahood. We have teachings in our tradition that come from many different lamas. They are all based on the Buddhist teachings, but the lamas give teachings that they themselves reveal based on the mind of enlightenment. But one should understand that the mind of enlightenment is the ultimate source for any teaching that can result in enlightenment. The seed is always like the fruit. You cannot just pluck a teaching out of the air. You know, you cannot take a teaching from some ordinary source. You cannot rely on the teaching of some self-proclaimed avatar who simply appears and says, I have an answer, and then 20, 30 years later dies in an ordinary way just like anyone else. This you cannot do. It wouldn't be useful. It would be like trying to cross the ocean of suffering in a boat that has never proved itself. It would not be useful. It's not practical to do so. It doesn't make sense intellectually. So we should rely on a boat that has crossed the ocean time and time again, a boat with no leaks, and that of course would be the Buddhist teaching, which has produced enlightenment in not one but many uncountable sentient beings, and has produced enlightenment with signs and relics and proofs that could not have appeared in any other way other than an extraordinary way. So how should we practice this compassion? That's a very theoretical way of presenting compassion, isn't it? Now you've heard this textbook, very theoretical way. Now you're asking yourself, great, what do I do when I leave here? Well, compassion is like, when the practice of compassion is something that we have to try on. We have to understand how we fit into compassion. We have to put it on and see if we can still walk in it, you know. And we have to see how we can manipulate in our lives in this suit of armor. How does it fit us? How can we work with it? To work with compassion, first of all, most people feel that they have to wait for a feeling of kindness, thinking that this feeling is like warm, fuzzy stuff, you know, that you have to wait till you develop spiritually sufficient to the point where you feel kind. And we even think that the person that goes, oh, I can't stand to watch people suffer, is far kinder than the person who just goes about the business of trying to help others. I don't agree with that at all. In fact, I think sometimes those who make a display of the emotion of sympathy, you know, are often the ones that have the least sympathy, because they're putting a great deal of energy into their own display. Furthermore, we are taught that if we wait for the idea or the feeling of loving kindness to overcome us to the point where we are compassionate, if we wait till that stage in our development, that stage will never come. Because ultimately all sentient beings are like. We all have the seed of Buddha nature within us. We all have the seed of Buddhahood. We have the potential of Buddhahood. How we appear, how we act, and even how we feel seem to make us different, but what they indicate is only that we have different habitual tendencies. Those that dedicate their whole lives to benefiting others, such as the beloved Mother Teresa or the great bodhisattvas who are known in the world to have done everything they could to make others be kind and to lead others toward enlightenment, the lamas who dedicate their lives to benefiting others, these ones who are habitually kind are not really different from us. They are habitually kind because they have developed the habit of kindness. Whereas people that hurt others and are not kind to others and don't go out of their way to be of benefit to others are not different from us either. They're the same as us. They are the same as Mother Teresa. They are the same as the lamas. In their nature, they are the same, but in their habitual tendency, they are quite different. Their habit is to be selfish. Their habit is to try to make themselves happy through a method that appears unkind. They have the habit of acting in a certain way, but they aren't really different from us. So those of you that think that you've got it knocked because you have an overly sympathetic and effusive nature and seem to be very sweet and kind and adorable are probably, well, as they said on my block, up the creek without a paddle. You should reevaluate. You don't really know if that's what your situation is. You must look at yourself more honestly than that. That doesn't give you a clue as to what your mind is doing. You simply have the habit of acting in a certain way. It may not mean that you have the habit of kindness at all. Can you take the book off the floor? You simply do not have the habit of kindness at all. You may not have the habit of kindness. You simply have the habit of acting a certain way. Whereas another person who is simply not thinking about that kind of thing too much, perhaps is not very demonstrative emotionally, and yet does what they have to do to make things come together, may have great potential for kindness. May be able, even though they are not effusive and not demonstrative, may be on an unconscious level thinking of kindness in many different ways. They try very hard to support their family. They try very hard to do right by the people that they know. They're very diplomatic, very honest, very, very noble in their perspective. And perhaps we shouldn't judge things in that way at all. Perhaps we should just think like this, because this is what the Buddha taught us, that all sentient beings are inherently equal, that they weigh exactly the same as one another in terms of their equality. The only difference between us is our habitual tendency. How interesting, because we have both praised and judged ourselves, haven't we? Thinking that we're too selfish or very kind, not really understanding what any of that meant. Each one of us has an equal shot at creating the habitual tendency of compassionate living, because we all have that nature, and all we have to do is learn the technology and begin to put it into practice. When we first begin to practice compassion, it may not feel like us at all. We may think that we're sort of cynical and we're sort of hard and we're sort of practical people and we're not used to this kind of thing, and what is all this mushy stuff anyway? We may think that we're like that. We may think that in trying to be kind to others, both on a temporary and ultimate level, that it's kind of unusual for us and we have to really stretch to do it. That doesn't mean that we're not kind by nature. It simply means that we're implementing a new habit. And like any new habit, it's a stretch at first. If any of you have been smokers and have quit smoking, you know how hard that is. It's not your habit to do that. You have to increase the habit of non-smoking bit by bit by bit. It doesn't feel natural at first. What feels natural is to pick up a cigarette and shove it in your mouth. That's what feels natural. So you feel like you're being contrived by not doing it. Or if you're trying to go on a diet, or if you're trying to learn some skill that you didn't learn before, if you're trying to learn how to be a certain way or how to develop a certain habit of exercise or a certain habit of thinking, anything, it feels unnatural at first. It is unnatural at first. So what's the big deal? That doesn't make you any different from anyone else. It only means that you have to learn a habit that is a good habit and will bring you benefit. It doesn't mean that you are less than anyone else. And on the other hand, if you are extremely effusive and extremely sympathetic and stuff like that, perhaps what you need to do is cut it out and learn a new habit. A habit of actually adapting the technology of what really is useful for sentient beings, both temporarily and permanently. Maybe it doesn't really help them for you to be overly sympathetic. Maybe it doesn't help them for you to be effusive and gracious. Maybe that's not so helpful for you to act sweet and kind. Maybe that's not helping them. Maybe it's only helping you. So having determined that, maybe now you need to learn what really is useful for sentient beings on a temporary and permanent level. Maybe you have to learn some technology. So according to the Buddha's teaching, compassion perhaps has a different view than what we're used to. And I think on this path, what holds people back the most is they are unwilling to take the plunge into learning how to be compassionate and into actually adapting the technology because they think they haven't got what it takes. Well, that's not true, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. Everybody's got what it takes equally. We have the Buddha seed equally, but we do have different habit patterns. And so for some of us it may feel like a giant leap, like we can be kind pretty easily. Like, maybe we've tried to do it pretty much, and so we can do it pretty well. Maybe we feel like we're having an easier time with it. And for others of us, it may take gritting our teeth and bearing ourselves forward with courage. But that doesn't make us less kind, and that doesn't make us less able. That only makes us a little different in our habitual tendencies. That's what has to change. The Buddha nature is already established. You cannot diminish it, and you cannot build it. It's already established. It is your nature. What must be changed is the habitual tendencies, the karma, cause and effect that we have adapted since time out of mind due to our belief in self-nature as being inherently real. These habitual tendencies are like the clothing that we've put on our egos, And we believe that we are that. We are this ego with this clothing on. We think that that's what we are. And it's a mistake. It isn't true. We are the undefiled, uncontrived, primordial wisdom view, that nature, which is free of contrivance and conceptualization, ultimately pure, spontaneous, and completely realized. However, we have surrounded ourselves with such belief that we think that we are only ego and we think that we are defined by our personality. It's not true. And that's the first habit we have to lose, is the habit of seeing ourselves in that regard and not understanding the teaching that tells us what must be changed, what must be taken up, the understanding of our nature, and what must be abandoned, the clinging to self-nature, and the habits that keep that self-nature so rigidly impaled in our minds. Each of us has an equal shot, and according to the Buddha's teaching, we are all perfectly equal. It's in some ways it's strange because when you look at the way Buddhism is taught, there's the Lama, and people do prostrations to the Lama, and people do reverence to the Lama, and people wonder why people that don't know about that, they don't know why everybody's practicing so much devotion to the Lama. It looks kind of hierarchical. There's a big Lama over here and there's a little Lama over there, and nobody knows why that is. But if you really study the Buddhist teachings, of all the teachings on the earth, it is clearly the most democratic. Clearly the most democratic. Because it never says that there is one who is the son of Buddha and not the others. It never says that there are those who are like the Buddha and not others. It says that we are the same in our inherent nature across the board. That we each have the Buddha nature. Not only people, and you may not like to hear this, but rats and mice and cockroaches and pigs and cows and dogs. We all have the Buddha nature equally. That's what the Buddha teaches. It is the most democratic of all religions. All colors, all creeds, even Christians have the Buddha nature. They have the Buddha nature. Men and women, blacks and whites, all different races, all different kinds. They all have the Buddha nature, absolutely equally so. So it's the most democratic. Of course, we do have a practice which is devotion, and in that practice we revere those who have the capacity to bring us the technology. And it's by virtue of their being able to bring us the technology, to hook us onto the path and to establish us in the path. It's by virtue of their capability of doing that that we revere them, because to us they are like the door of liberation. But they're not better in the sense that they have more Buddha nature. You see what I'm saying? It's still a very democratic idea. So, from the point of view of compassion, what one must adapt in this particular philosophy, in this teaching, is equal compassion for all sentient beings. We have to have compassion for bugs. We have to have compassion for rats. We have to have compassion for fleas. We have to have compassion for cockroaches. We have to have compassion for all races, all creeds, all kinds of people, all kinds of sentient beings, Christians. That's a joke because, one thing that happens to me all the time when I go out into the world, which I try not to do too much. No, that's not true. I do. But it used to happen to me a lot more, was that I would meet up with people that would try to convert me to their religion. And they would say, in fact, I still get letters where people say, we read about you in the newspaper. How could you possibly turn against, Jesus? I don't think I have. I don't think I've been converted at all. I think that what I did was I tried to find a technology that would lead to the state of enlightenment. For myself, I feel that Jesus, like many others who have brought the idea and the teaching of compassion to the world, was a great bodhisattva. And he showed signs of extreme realization, the signs that he showed of having his body disappear and having his body reappear after the time of death, and the light in the tomb and all those different things that he showed. They are signs of great realization. There are lamas in our lineage that have shown similar signs to that. So I have to respect him as one who has achieved realization. I have to respect him as a great teacher, a great bodhisattva. But what I'm looking for is a whole and complete technology that I can help others to get into, like a boat, and cross the ocean of suffering in a very safe way, so that they can cross in such a way as to be sure to reach the other shore. And the other shore, of course, is that of enlightenment. That's my idea of compassion. That's how I want to practice compassion. I don't want to send them off in a boat that has holes in it that I don't know is going to work. And for myself, I have seen that the technology the Buddha has left behind, it has been left behind in its entirety. It has never been covered over. Parts of it have not been lost. The whole thing is left succinct. So the whole boat's there, not the boat without the rudder, or the boat without the steering wheel, or the boat with a couple of holes in it. The whole thing's there. So being the practical kind of person I am, I can't be converted into any other religion, because I'm going to be in a boat that crosses the water. I'm just that practical. And I want all my friends to be in that too. So I feel that the greatest, most compassionate thing that we can do is to have compassion for all peoples, whatever race, whatever religion, whatever creed, whatever color, whatever sex, whatever disposition they have, whether they are human or non-human, whatever sentient being. We should do what we can to have all sentient beings form a connection with the auspicious path that can bring them to the goal of enlightenment. This, to me, is ultimate compassion. I may do a lot of things in my life, but ultimately, pretty much all that I do is going to be directed toward that. You see what I'm saying? If I build a stupa, it's going to be with that in mind. If I build a temple, it's going to be with that in mind. Everything that I do is going to be with that in mind, to create the auspicious connection. So that's how I'm viewing compassion. But I also try to view it in an ordinary way, but not to the degree that I practice idiot compassion. You ever heard of idiot compassion? Oh, you haven't? Who hasn't heard of idiot compassion? Who said that? I'm going to tell you about idiot compassion. Actually, I don't think this is written in the Buddha's text anywhere. I think this was my idea. But the basic philosophy for idiot compassion is in the Buddha's teachings. In the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha teaches us that we have to do what will ultimately benefit sentient beings. Yes, in a temporary way, but most especially in an ultimate way. Right? Okay. Now, try to follow this. We're kind of beating around the bush today, but here's what I'm doing. I'm climbing the mountain of understanding compassion, and I'm sort of doing it like this. See what I'm saying? So that we as ordinary Western sentient beings can have an understanding that we can apply to our own lives. Okay, didn't we talk about how lamas sometimes appear hierarchical in Western religion? I mean, from the Western point of view, they seem kind of hierarchical to us. Well, sometimes it seems to be even worse than that if you don't understand what's going on, because sometimes it seems as though the lamas will pay more attention to some students than to others. Isn't that horrible? How evil of them. Especially when it's you they're not paying attention to. You know when that really works out well is when you're the glory child that week. And that happens. That really happens. Certainly I've seen it in my relationship with my teachers, and certainly I've seen it generally in students' relationships with their teachers, and certainly I have practiced it with my own students. So I know what this is. This can be a troublesome thought in the mind of a student or a potential student. It can appear very differently and in different ways. Sometimes, let's take different students that are first approaching the path. Sometimes a student first approaches the path, and the way that they come into the path it almost seems as though the teacher welcomes them with open arms. Oh, you finally come. How wonderful. Come on down. Couldn't make them more welcome. They are made so welcome. They are made to feel that they have fallen into the arms of nirvana, and that the soup's on, you know, and that this is going to feel so yummy you can't believe it. Well, and then there are other students that first come into the path, and it seems as though they do everything but go, I'm here, and nobody pays any attention to them. And they walk around going, nobody pays any attention to me. She never looks, she don't even know I'm here. She never looks at me. And then it happens that sometimes the students who are welcomed with open arms, later on it's just like they can't get the time of day. They can't seem to get the attention of the teacher. Teacher doesn't want to pay any attention to them. They kind of go, remember me? I'm the golden child. And the teacher goes, did you hear anything? What's this? And then suddenly, the one who hasn't been paid any attention to, finally, their apple falls. The apple becomes ripe, and it falls. And the day has arrived. And once in class, the teacher is giving a teaching, and they look at them and give them da-da-da-da, the meaningful look. Right? And that is the day when they feel that they have been hooked into Dharma, and blah, 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 yada, yada. Well, let me tell you why all of this stuff is. This may seem as though this is a very strange way to act. I mean, the way we paint our saints, we'd like to have our saints and religious leaders be such that they're just like all beneficent, you know, all magnanimous, all compassion. That we'd like them to wear white, first of all. You'd like them all to be virgins. They should all be perfect in form and talk, and they should never have Brooklyn accent. I mean, that's like... And anyway, they should all be so perfect, and then they should shine like the sun, where you come into their presence and everyone is blessed equally, and you go away enlightened. Well, has that happened to any of you yet? No, never. And unless the Buddha reappears and decides to take that form, it probably never will. The way that the path happens to us doesn't happen to us according to the whim of the teacher. actually. It happens to us according to the karma and the habitual tendency of our mind. And a qualified teacher will know how to work with that. And that's real compassion. Here's the interesting thing. A student may come into the path, and the teacher may, through the value of their practice, or through their meditational ability, or through whatever capabilities they have, whatever qualifications they have, the teacher may recognize that that student has a connection that can be worked with, but there's not really a lot of merit there, that the person has not accumulated a lot of merit that would help them to remain stable on the path. So what would the teacher do then? If the teacher were to make a big deal about that student, it would actually burn up a lot of the merit that they have accumulated in order to bring them into the path, and their capability to remain stable on the path would remain very short-lived. It would not be compassionate at all. Oh, sure, it would make the student feel better temporarily. Oh, sure, it would make the teacher feel better because the teacher would be popular. You know, that's all the teacher has to do, is go out and make a big deal about everybody. Then the teacher would be popular. But it would not be compassionate. That is not useful. And then another thing that might happen is that a different kind of student may come, and the teacher may realize that an extraordinary bulk of merit is ripening at that time, and that the teacher can use that. Maybe their connection with the path is minimal, but their connection with the teacher is very strong, and they have some merit ripening at that time that they can work with. So the teacher can make a big deal about that student. And the student gets hooked, brought into the path, and then quickly the teacher does everything but beat them with a stick to try to get them to do Dharma things, like make tsatsas, like do Dharma things right now. You know, do all these Dharma things, and pretty soon, because of that, the student has lots and lots of connection with the path. You see? And so now they're stable. But what if the teacher, you know, just was too lazy and didn't want to pay a lot of attention to that student, didn't want to do that? Then the student didn't have much connection with the path, but they had a lot of connection with the teacher. They wouldn't have ripened, you see? They couldn't have remained. They wouldn't have been hooked. So a teacher, hopefully, if they're worth their salt, won't practice idiot compassion, because idiot compassion would be to practice what appears to be the right thing to do, but really isn't the right thing to do. Another thing that happens is that sometimes a student who can be practicing for a year but not practicing that good, or maybe practicing pretty well, can then have a bunch of non-virtue ripen for some reason, like they brought forth a lot of anger in their minds or something like that. And the teacher, seeing that a lot of non-virtue is ripening, is not going to make them unstable on the path by paying a lot of attention to them at that time. In fact, they will kind of ignore them, let them stew in their own juices, and just recommend a lot of practice. Sort of put them out there and not use up a lot of virtue, which they have a small supply of right then, by really paying a lot of attention to them. They'll kind of put them out there for a while and let them work through it. Watch them, but let them work through it. Because idiot compassion would have been to say, I know that you're having a rough time, everything's so hard for you, you're not making any money, and you look ugly today, and you're not very happy, and your husband is leaving, and your wife's not very good, and your kids are, and everybody's on drugs, and like your head's, and a house burned down, and you're sick, and you're dying, and all this kind of stuff. Come over here, darling, let me take care of you. That might kill them, you see? That might do them in altogether. And so that would be practicing idiot compassion. Now, ordinary people practice idiot compassion all the time. That is, compassion that serves them and not the people they're really being compassionate toward. Like, for instance, if you know that a person is very needy and they always habitually act needy, and that no matter what you do for them, they're still going to act needy. Any of you know people like that? Everybody knows somebody like that, don't we? I mean, that is the way some sentient beings act. It's not uncommon. Thinking that you're doing them a favor, but actually thinking that it would make you a kind person, you allow them to act needy in that way. You try to satisfy them, mostly try to satisfy them enough to get them off your back. And what you're actually doing is reinforcing your own idea that you are a kind person, but you're not helping them. Because they are increasing their habit pattern of acting needy. You see? So, and then another way in which we might act out some idiot compassion is that a person will come to us and they'll say, "Oh, I hate my boss. My boss is always picking on me. These things always happen to me," and they'll begin the litany of victimization, right? This happened to everyone. Everyone, sometime in their lives, have had it where someone has come to you with a litany of victimization, where you've been told that they tell you how they are deeply victimized in their own lives. Everyone has told us that. We've all heard the story before. Idiot compassion would be to say, there, poor darling. I know everything's so hard for you right now." That's idiot compassion. Maybe you might have to do that a tiny bit just to get their attention. But after that, what you really need to do is try to hit them with the fact that nothing happens to anyone that did not arise in their own mind. That's the truth. No one is a victim. If we are suffering, we are suffering as a reflection of our own karma. If people continuously hurt us, it is because we have hurt someone or something in the past. All we have to do to know what we've looked like in the past is to look in the mirror now and see what we look like now. How is karma ripening for us now? Then we'll know what we've done in the past. So the method for that person really wants to change their life, is not to get sympathy, but to change how they deal with others, how they implement compassion in their lives. You know, if we've been involved in relationships that have constantly hurt us, then we have to understand that we have partaken in relationships like that before, where we have hurt others. So now we should change, be consistently kind and generous, always applying as well as we can the ideas of generosity, the practice of generosity. And if you're going to practice real compassion, that's what you're going to tell that person who comes to you with a litany of victimization. Practice love. The question is, yes, but can you still love? Oh, this has happened to me. You don't understand. This has happened to me. This has happened to me. Yes, but can you still love? That's the real question. But like idiots, we say, there, sweetheart. I understand. That doesn't help them, because they get to play out their silliness and deepen the habit and make it worse. And it gets worse every time we do it, doesn't it? Just like every time we smoke another cigarette or whatever it is that we do that's a bad habit, it gets worse. So compassion has to be understood by human beings on human terms. The first thing that we have to do, and this is like a basic guideline, is we have to understand, in order to understand what compassion is, we have to understand the result of compassion. Is the compassionate act that we are doing going to bring a very temporary result, or will it bring an ultimate result? And based on that, we have to make a decision as to what we will actually do. If we wish to practice temporary compassion, and we should, we will help people in whatever human way we can give help, in whatever ordinary way we can give help. Perhaps we can be generous in money, or in time, or in kindness, or in help, in some way like that. But if we really want to help people in a permanent way, we have to look at what would be the method to end their suffering permanently. We have to look at what makes suffering. Suffering is caused by desire, by ego clinging. How can we end their suffering? By helping them to become acquainted with and ultimately practice a technology that leads to enlightenment. By propagating a technology that leads to enlightenment. By helping to make it firmer and stronger in the world so that it can benefit others. That's what we really have to look at. There's a lot of confusion about that in the world, and it's a hard habit to break. Some of the most compassionate people that I've ever met went for degrees in like psychology, or sociology, thinking that they would try to solve the problems of the world in this way, not really understanding that even if they put in all those years of schooling and they work their whole lives trying to pacify these ills of the world, they can only be pacified in a temporary way because they are the ills of the world. And even if we do help a person from the time they are born till the time that they die, none of us, no matter how many degrees we have, can help them after they die. We don't know where they'll be reborn. We don't know what their bardo experience is going to be like. If we want to reach them in some permanent way, we have to create a method by which they can achieve realization. Enlightenment is the permanent end of suffering. So I feel like for me, my solution has been, and I found my solution, so I feel like I can talk. My solution has been to make sure that stupas are built and temples are built and stuff like that, so I'm going to do that. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to help people achieve enlightenment? You can display kindness so that they will copy you. You can do that. You can practice the path and accomplish the technology so that you could administer the technology to others or help others to become part of the technology. You can help build a stupa. You can help propagate the Dharma and help the Dharma to appear in a firm and stable way in the world. These are tremendously meritorious activities that any of you are invited to participate. Certainly there's no shortage of things that we can do. But even on a very simple, very ordinary, even in terms of non-Buddhist terminology, and really this is a class that should apply to all peoples, you can actually practice compassion in such a way as to demonstrate that to others, because each time a person practices compassion, if they copy you, the method of compassion that they learn from you is a merit to your mind as well, because you help them to do that. And every time that you do something compassionate, please remember to dedicate all of your merits to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. Because if you don't dedicate the merit to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, the next moment you're angry, it might outweigh that little compassionate thing that you just did. But if you dedicate the merit to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, it's like you've put it in a mutual bank account. You know what I'm saying? And no one single person can take it out, but it can certainly benefit the corporation of man, humankind, or sentient being kind. They don't have a word for that yet. I have to think of what a word for sentient being kind is. I have to develop a Western word for that. Anyway, the corporation of all sentient beings. You've put it in the corporation of all sentient beings, and it benefits us all, yourself included. So be sure and quickly do that, as quickly as possible, as quickly as you can, so that that merit won't be lost. But think. Now that's the main thrust of this teaching. Think about what you're doing. Are you constantly creating non-virtue and constantly reinforcing the habit pattern of selfishness and desire and those things that create cause and effect relationships that result in suffering? Or are you practicing both temporary and ultimate compassion, the bodhicitta it's called, in such a way as to create the habit of compassion within your mind, and also in such a way as to benefit sentient beings? Doesn't that seem like a wiser investment? I mean, when you stop to think that no matter what you do in your lifetime, that's really all you can take with you, is the quality of your mind, the karma, cause and effect relationships that are the components and tapestry of your mental continuum. This is the only thing that you'll take with you when you leave. Doesn't it make sense to put all your effort into that? Doesn't it make sense to start now? It's the only thing that's reasonable and logical. So in thinking about compassion, please think about it in the ways that the Buddha taught it, but then also think about it in very ordinary human ways, like what about today? What about now? What can I really do? What makes some compassionate activity weightier than others? What should I dedicate the bulk of my activity to? think. Don't act by instinct, because our instinct is only one thing. It is our habitual tendency. And our habitual tendency since time out of mind has been to act in such a way as to try to make ourselves happy. But the Buddha teaches us that while all sentient beings want to be happy, they do not know how to be happy. We think that in order to make ourselves happy, we should be self-absorbed. We should be selfish. We should think what we want. And that will never produce happiness, because it only produces the habit of desire and selfishness. That's all it produces, more of the same. So don't rely on your habit patterns. Don't just kind of go with the flow. Don't rely on your instincts. Your gut feelings may be wrong. They probably are. Because your gut feeling is only based on habitual tendency, what you have seen, what you have learned, and everything you see, including how you enter the path, is according to the karma of your mind. Habit pattern, cause and effect. And in conclusion, and I'd like to wind up that little bit that I gave you about how a teacher greets a student on the path. Once you've decided that a certain teacher has the qualifications to give you what you need, or at least provide for you what you need, and that a teacher has a certain quality that really speaks to you, and you decide that that's what you need to do, and you're there where you want to be, then once you make that relationship, don't doubt it. Don't doubt it because one day you're getting a little special attention and the next day you're not. Don't doubt it because you're not getting what you think you rightly deserve, which is a red carpet. It may not be the case that that's what's best for you. One thing that I have found for myself is that the Buddha's compassion is endless. Guru Rinpoche's compassion, and he is, of course, is considered to be an emanation of the Buddha, is endless, boundless. You know that Christian line about God sees the littlest sparrow? I don't remember exactly how it goes, something like that. But I have found out for myself, time and time again, that Buddha's compassion extends to every living thing, every sentient being of all kinds. If there is any connection that potentially can be ripened, it will be ripened. It has been my experience to see that beauty played out again and again and again. So, from my point of view, I have seen that Lord Buddha, that Guru Rinpoche welcome us each with precious parasols and gorgeous carriages and auspicious elephants and all of the wonderful auspicious offerings that are so perfect in their description of the qualities of the Buddha. Each one of us is welcomed with bells and whistles for all of us that are Westerners. But it may take a different form according to the karma of our mind. You have to trust that. Each one of us has equal Buddha nature. No one is more and no one is less. Each one of us has equal capacity to practice. But we have to approach it as we can. Some more slowly, some with a lot of fanfare, some more simply. The point I'm trying to make is that we should try to remain steadfast. I hope I never make the mistake. I think I have perhaps in the past, but I hope I never do in the future make the mistake of practicing idiot compassion, paying too much attention to one student who was wearing a little thin on the merit department, at that time, and causing them to be shaky on the path. And I hope that I never make the mistake of not paying attention to a student who was righteously calling out to me in some way, and who had, at that point, what it took to really use their relationship with me. I hope that I never denied them whatever nourishment was mine to give them. I hope that that is never the case. I can certainly pray that I never practice idiot compassion. And I can certainly pray that I'll be able to dedicate whatever merit I accumulate in this life to the liberation of salvation of all sentient beings. And you should make the same prayers. You're the same as me. You should dedicate your effort to bringing about this ultimate result and pray that it is of benefit to sentient beings. And try not to practice idiot compassion. Really look, think, evaluate what the Buddha has taught about compassion. Think it through.
To